Picture this. The year is 1808. Across the sun-scorched plains of Spain, 200,000 of Napoleon's finest veterans march with iron discipline, banners fluttering in the wind. But instead of victory, they find themselves swallowed by shadows, ambushes in mountain passes, poisoned wells, whispers of death in the night. The world's greatest army begins to bleed, not from grand battles, but from a people who refuse to surrender their land or their souls. When Napoleon Bonaparte turned his gaze toward the Iberian Peninsula, he saw opportunity. A gateway to control Europe's trade routes, a chance to humble Britain through blockade, and to replace old monarchies with thrones of his own making. Spain, weakened by corruption and royal infighting, seemed ripe for the taking. In 1808, French troops entered under the guise of alliance, only to seize the country in a swift, cold betrayal. What followed wasn't a traditional war of empires, it was chaos, rage, and vengeance unleashed by civilians who refused to kneel. Farmers, priests, and housewives became executioners in the dark. Every alley became a trap, every church a meeting ground for revolt. For the first time, the invincible Grande Armée faced an enemy that didn't march in formation or sign treaties. This was not a war fought for borders, but for survival. And as the empire's drums echoed across Europe, Napoleon's dream of total domination would stumble upon a nation that bled for its freedom, drop by drop. Where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoy dark history stories like this, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share your feedback in the comments. The invasion began not with the roar of cannons, but with the quiet shuffle of boots across the Pyrenees. French columns poured into Spain in early 1808, their uniforms immaculate, their eagles gleaming beneath the spring sun. Napoleon's officers believed it would be a swift campaign, one more conquest to add to the emperor's growing list of triumphs. After all, Spain was a divided kingdom, its armies poorly trained, its rulers corrupt. But what they did not understand was that Spain's strength did not lie in its palaces or regiments. It lived in the mountains, in the villages, in the hearts of people who had nothing left to lose. The French came as liberators. They were received as invaders. From the moment French troops occupied Madrid and placed Joseph Bonaparte, Napoleon's brother, on the throne, the nation seemed to hold its breath. Then, like a match dropped into a powder keg, rebellion exploded. Peasants took up hunting rifles, priests raised crucifixes as banners, and merchants turned their shops into arsenals. Across the countryside, rumors spread like wildfire. French soldiers were desecrating churches, stealing food, taking what they pleased. In every valley and town, the cry was the same: Muere el francés, death to the French. What made this revolt unlike any other was its chaos. There was no single leader, no organized army. Each province fought in its own way, guided by rage, faith, and the promise of revenge. The French, used to orderly battlefields, were bewildered by the invisible enemy that struck from behind rocks and olive trees, vanishing into the hills before a shot could be returned. Supply convoys disappeared overnight. Scouts were found mutilated, their uniforms stripped, their faces marked with the sign of the cross carved by trembling hands. Imagine being one of those soldiers, marching through a narrow pass at dusk, hearing nothing but the hum of insects, when suddenly the world explodes in smoke and screaming. Stones roll from above, muskets fire from hidden caves, and comrades fall beside you before you even see who is killing you. The war that Napoleon, unexpected to last. Weeks turned into months of terror. The proud veterans of Austerlitz and Jena now fought not against kings but against shadows, men who fought by night and melted away by dawn. But here's the chilling part. The more brutal the French became, the more vicious the resistance grew. Every reprisal created 10 new enemies. Entire villages were burned to the ground, their inhabitants executed as bandits. Yet even as towns turned to ash, the survivors swore vengeance and took to the hills. The French soldiers, who once marched to the sound of drums, now trudged through silence, haunted by unseen eyes. Letters from the front spoke of unbearable exhaustion, of comrades vanishing without a trace. Some whispered that Spain itself had turned against them, that the land and the people were possessed by something unbreakable. Napoleon called them the cancer of Spain, these guerrillas, yet it was a cancer that no surgeon could cut away. The years dragged on, and Spain became a labyrinth of terror and resilience. Every city occupied by the French seemed to rot from within, its streets haunted by spies, informants, and the ever-present threat of rebellion. Soldiers who had once conquered Europe with disciplined precision found themselves trapped in alleys, hunted by women wielding knives, children throwing stones from rooftops, and men vanishing into the forests before counterattacks could even be launched. In Toledo, a single house became a fortress where a family of 5 resisted an entire garrison for 3 days, holding them off with nothing but pitchforks, boiling oil, and their unyielding will. Tales of bravery and atrocity intertwined. A French officer writing home described the horror of stumbling upon a town square strewn with bodies, yet hearing hymns rising from the ruins, echoing through shattered walls. Civilians were not passive victims, they became architects of suffering, striking with cunning patience. Imagine walking through a village, knowing each shadow could conceal a hidden musket, each doorway could be an ambush. Napoleon's veterans, hardened by decades of war, began to crumble, not from superior forces, but from the unpredictability of a people who refused to surrender. Expert historians today point to this campaign as one of the earliest forms of guerrilla warfare, a term derived from the Spanish word for little war. It was unconventional, messy, and profoundly effective. The French army's usual tactics, line formations, coordinated volleys, artillery barrages, were useless against this invisible enemy. Supply chains broke down, morale plummeted, and letters to Paris became pleas for reinforcements that rarely arrived in time. Meanwhile, local leaders emerged from obscurity. Priests, farmers, and even young boys organized resistance cells that outmaneuvered the seasoned French generals. Some of the deadliest ambushes occurred at night, in the narrow passes of the Sierra Morena, where every footstep could be the last. Napoleon's dream of quick conquest turned into a grinding nightmare, the kind that gnaws at men's souls, leaving them hollow, questioning their purpose, and longing for home that seemed impossibly far away. And yet, even as the French suffered, the Spanish toll was catastrophic. Entire villages were depopulated, families destroyed, livelihoods erased, but each act of violence against the populace only strengthened their resolve. Guerrilla fighters moved like ghosts, striking in ways the French could never predict, then vanishing before retaliation could catch them. The war became psychological as much as physical. Soldiers feared every shadow. Civilians learned to wield fear as a weapon. Modern parallels can be drawn to insurgencies centuries later, yet here it was raw, unrefined, born from desperation rather than ideology. Imagine being in that time, in those mountains, hearing the cries of both the oppressed and the oppressors intertwine, unable to distinguish who would survive until morning. This relentless, creeping terror shattered the confidence of even the most battle-hardened veterans, proving that no army, no matter how mighty, could conquer a nation that refused to bend. The final phase of this grueling campaign revealed the full extent of Spain's defiance and the unraveling of Napoleon's grand plans. By 1810, what had started as isolated rebellions had coalesced into a relentless network of resistance, stretching from the rugged Pyrenees to the sun-baked plains of Andalusia. French veterans, once invincible, found themselves trapped in a web of ambushes and deceit, forced to march through territories where every hill, every orchard, every crumbling wall concealed enemies who struck without warning. Imagine being a commander standing atop a ridge at dawn, scanning the horizon for a town that might offer supplies, only to see smoke curling from rooftops that had just been sacked by your own forces in retaliation for attacks the night before. Your soldiers are exhausted, starving, haunted by what they have seen and done. They are no longer fighting merely to win a battle. They are fighting to survive each day, each hour, each moment. And yet the Spanish, knowing their homes, their families, and their lives were on the line, refused to relent. Mothers taught their daughters how to hide in caves with buckets of stones ready to pour down on unsuspecting soldiers. Fathers trained sons to move silently through forests, to strike quickly and vanish before the French could rally. Entire villages became traps. Courtyards that once hosted markets now hid sharpened stakes, boiling oil, and pits covered with fragile boards. The once proud veterans, seasoned in the art of European warfare, were broken not by open fields or mighty cannons, but by the ingenuity and fury of civilians wielding whatever they could. Reports from the front described an almost apocalyptic landscape. Bridges had been burned, grain stores poisoned, roads littered with bodies, and towns emptied of life. French letters back to Paris were frantic, detailing the exhaustion, the hunger, the near-constant terror of marching through unknown villages where a sudden shout could trigger an ambush. Napoleon himself, reading these accounts, grew increasingly frustrated. How could a people with no formal army, no centralized command, no discipline, so consistently humiliate his finest troops? Yet the Spanish victory was not born of sheer numbers or strategy alone. It was the moral and psychological edge, the intimate knowledge of the land, and the unbreakable will of ordinary citizens turned warriors. Priests who once preached sermons now guided resistance movements. Bakers who once kneaded bread became messengers carrying vital intelligence from village to village. Children and the elderly alike found roles in this invisible war, each action amplifying the despair of the invaders. Imagine being a soldier. Every shadow could conceal death, every doorway could hide a hidden foe, every night could be your last. Sleep became impossible, trust disappeared, and the relentless unpredictability of the Spanish resistance gnawed at even the most disciplined minds. In the mountains near Zaragoza, small bands of guerrillas orchestrated attacks that became the stuff of legend. They struck convoys, set ambushes, and vanished into the rocks with an ease that seemed supernatural. French veterans who had survived countless European campaigns found themselves cornered, bewildered, and terrified. Imagine being at the rear of a column, hearing the sharp report of a musket, the screech of a cart tipping over, the scream of a comrade, and realizing that no reinforcements would arrive in time. Yet it was not merely physical exhaustion that haunted the French, it was psychological devastation. Every raid, every surprise attack reminded them that they were in enemy territory, that the people themselves were the enemy, and that victory was slipping further from their grasp. The terror spread beyond the battlefield, infecting entire garrisons, leaving officers second-guessing their decisions, soldiers trembling at night, and commanders desperate for solutions that did not exist. The atrocities committed by the French in retaliation were infamous and only fueled further resistance. Villages were burned, livestock seized, civilians executed, and churches desecrated. But rather than breaking the spirit of the population, these acts ignited a deeper fury. Survivors vowed vengeance. Farmers who had witnessed the murder of their families took up rifles. Children learned the art of stealth in the shadow of tragedy. The countryside became an intricate theatre of warfare where fear was weaponized by both sides, but the French, as occupiers, bore the brunt of it. Every march through a Spanish valley could mean death. Every attempt to resupply a town could end in massacre. Napoleon's veterans, accustomed to open battlefields and rigid tactics, were ill-equipped to navigate the uncertainty and chaos. They became shadows of their former selves, weary, haunted, and broken, their morale eroding with each ambush, each burned village, each whispered threat in the night. Yet through it all, the Spanish people endured. Entire regions were left in smouldering ruin, yet resistance never ceased. Guerrilla leaders emerged from obscurity, sometimes mere teenagers, sometimes aging priests, orchestrating attacks with precision, timing, and cunning that rivaled any European general. Villagers became spies, couriers, and warriors, leveraging knowledge of the terrain, tunnels, and secret paths. Modern parallels can be drawn to insurgencies across history, but in Spain it was raw, primal, and relentless, fueled by desperation, survival, and an unshakable refusal to bow. Imagine living in that world, the sun beating down on bloodied streets, the night alive with whispers of planning, every door a potential trap, every shadow a threat. And still, life continued. Farmers sowed crops by day, guerrillas moved by night, and families clung to hope amidst devastation. The psychological toll on the French was catastrophic. Officers reported hallucinations, chronic anxiety, and a deep, gnawing fear that no matter how many towns they conquered, the war would never end. The nation itself seemed to rise against them, turning ordinary life into a weapon. By 1812, the campaign had shredded the myth of French invincibility. Napoleon's 200,000 veterans had lost cohesion, faith, and countless lives. Supply lines were impossible to maintain. Communication was slow, unreliable, and often intercepted. Morale plummeted. Soldiers fought not for glory but to survive. In contrast, the Spanish people, ordinary civilians with extraordinary courage, continued to resist, adapt, and strike. They embodied the idea that an army, no matter how vast or skilled, could falter against a nation united in its determination to resist oppression. Imagine the weight of it. Men who had conquered Europe, now unable to secure a single town, forced to retreat in confusion, stalked by shadows that seemed to multiply by the hour. Each skirmish, each ambush, each act of defiance chipped away at the Grande Armée, proving that human spirit, knowledge of one's land, and sheer resolve could outmatch even the most disciplined soldiers. The war that Napoleon could not win was not marked by a single battle or moment. It was a slow, suffocating drain, each loss, each ambush, each burnt village a drop in a flood that no army could hold back. Frank, his finest veterans, became ghosts, wandering through a hostile land haunted by fear, exhaustion, and a mounting realization that they were being defeated not just on the battlefield, but in mind, spirit, and morale. And all the while, the people of Spain, the unseen architects of resistance, grew stronger, more ingenious, and more determined. Their courage turned the invaders' might into impotence, their unity transformed chaos into strategy, and their unyielding will made history remember that no empire, no matter how mighty, could crush a nation determined to fight for its very soul. Napoleon's dreams of conquest bled away on the rugged hills and sun-scorched plains of Spain, where ordinary people transformed into relentless fighters. The Grande Armée, once feared across Europe, found itself trapped in a war it could never control. Villages burned, families shattered, and soldiers haunted by fear and exhaustion became unwilling witnesses to a struggle far greater than any battlefield victory could resolve. Spain's resistance proved that courage, cunning, and unyielding determination could topple even the most disciplined armies. The echoes of musket fire, the hidden ambushes, the silent resilience of civilians, they all left an indelible mark on history, a reminder that power alone cannot conquer a people united by survival and faith. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe, hit the bell icon, like the video, and tell us in the comments what type of stories you'd like to see. Share your thoughts about Spain's fight against Napoleon's veterans. Could a modern army survive such an invisible, patient enemy? Let us know. And remember, history often favors those who refuse to surrender, no matter the odds.